My name is Hossain. My colleague here is Stuart Forbes. My background is I'm an architect. I run a company called Adram, which some of you might know. I'm also a business consultant to a number of firms. The nature of this discussion is really for me to kick off and give you an overview. I've been working with the RIBA to do a macro picture of what small practitioners are feeling. And there's a lot of quite straightforward standard questions, but in the main, I think it's kind of questions that you will all be thinking as you're sat at home on your kitchen table. In contrast to me, I've asked my colleague Stuart, who is a practitioner and has come from Richard Rogers at the very beginning and set up his own practice and now runs a really successful practice in London. And he can give you kind of his perspective as someone who is practicing. And I hope it's useful. First thing, we surveyed about 120 practices, about 104 responded. Of the 104, this is pretty much the breakdown. 92% are RIBA chartered practices, and 27% were non-members of the RIBA, but they were running as little businesses. In the main, they all had ARB, but they'd chosen not to be RIBA for their own reasons. 72.8% sole practitioners by preference, others due to redundancy, a quarter by redundancy, and then right at the end, the really small one there, is about 3% who were doing practice out of default, not because they wanted to, but because they had got tired of sending CVs, it hadn't come to anything yet, and they said, I may as well try this. Moving forward from there, we found, in asking practices, do you have a business plan? There's a huge array of answers. 47% didn't have a business plan. 38% they have an unwritten business plan. And about 15% had a formal business plan. So we're saying that if you've only got about 15% that have got a formal business plan, then a lot of the time everyone else is kind of doing things, playing it by ear. And how safe is that? How safe is that in this economy? How safe is that if you want to grow a business? How safe is that if you want to have a projection of where you want to go? And why was that? Now, we started talking to practices and we said, why don't you have a business plan? A lot of people felt that a business plan is quite restrictive. You know, you put your agenda down. It's a bit like, you know, when you have a new year and you say, here's my New Year's resolutions. I want to go to the gym. I want to lose a bit of weight. I want to see friends every Wednesday. And by about February, you stop going to the gym. You're still seeing friends, but you're not so healthy. By about April, May, you stop seeing friends because you get thrown into the thick of work. And those New Year's resolutions go. So a lot of people definitely don't have New Year's resolutions. And this is a little bit like business plans, because people feel that sometimes business plans are there to help you fail, but they're not. They're there to help you have a direction, and the great thing about them is you can change them. They're not fixed in stone. So, moving from that, if you don't have a business plan, where you're going to go, any road will get you there. Is this what you want? I think, as a practitioner, you want to come in, welcome, take a seat. As a practitioner, you want to know that I have total control. So it's about empowerment. As a business leader, you're all, I mean, first of all, congratulations, you're all business leaders. You're all here at Small Practitioners Seminar because you're working by yourself. And if you're being able to maintain yourself, make a living, pay your bills, actually you're achieving what a lot of people want to achieve. So many practices feel they haven't had a business plan because they're not quite sure where they really want to go. And if you don't know where you want to go, then you think about it. And when you're practicing on a project, when you've got a project, it's kind of a bit of a relief because you think, well, I'm doing something. And if you're doing something, you're occupied, your mind is occupied, but you're still not pushing the boundaries of where you want to go next. And so, in some respects, again, you're doing half of the job of a practitioner, and you're falling into a strong suit of being comfortable with running a project, which is what you did when you worked for someone. So again, it brings you back to this idea of, I run a business, I'm a business leader, I need to do that little bit extra. I need to move that forward. When we ask people in the survey, what's the biggest obstacle to you moving forward and not procrastinating? Can I ask, if I were to ask you, in your practice, what's your biggest hurdle that you face every day?
Time. Not time. No.
Would you agree with that?
Managing staff, I would say.
Staff, time.
Getting clients to commit.
Sorry?
Like getting clients to commit.
Clients to commit, so you're chasing them again. Shortage of
Cash flow, probably the biggest one.
cash flow. Well, they're all great ones.
I think deciding whether you're going to grow or not. Because I'm on my own.
Which kind of brings you back to this one, really, isn't it? Procrastination.
On that slide.
I mean, in reality, you know, it's a black and white thing. You either grow or you don't. Either way, it's fine. You know, it's absolutely good. But the biggest problem people felt was this. The lady said at the back there, time. We had about 85% of respondents said, the hardest problem I have in running a practice is time. On the one side, I love running a practice. Even though I'm not making much money, you know, I can go to the gym in the morning, which is worth to me more than £5,000–6,000 if I worked in a practice of a pay rise, because I have the time as my own. So I'm time rich in that respect, but you're not. You know, and on the other side, you have the idea of I can drop off my kids at school, I can do some work there, I can pick them up later again, be a parent, be involved, but then at the same time, I could do some work later on. So actually, your time is structured, but it's broken. And that breakage of time is what seems to be the thing that disarms practitioners. A lot of practitioners are saying that, yeah, I do have the luxury of time in respects of I can do things and I can do other bits of my life, but I don't have a continuous flow of time. And I miss the discipline of having an office where I'm
Focus.
Yeah, focus, where I've got good chunking time. Well, who stops you doing that? And it's that dichotomy of I want to have a lifestyle business, but I want to have a business that's functioning as a fully fledged business that the people I work for have. So it's a decision. To take one of the reasons people didn't have a business plan was they felt it took too much time to write one. It was a complicated thing. It felt like, do I need spreadsheets? Do I need this? Need that? You know, if you're one person or if you're 3 people, and I think the majority of practices are under about 5 people, something like 80% are under 5 people, then your business plan doesn't have to be any more complex than this. If you take only one thing away, this is perhaps a good thing to take. Simple business plan. You've got your vision of where you'd like to be. And it doesn't have to be a 5-year plan, because no one knows where you're going to be in 5 years, you know. But it could be at least until next year. This time next year, I would like to have at least one project which gains me a fee of £20,000, say, right? So what's the first thing you do? You look at projects potentially that are £20,000 worth in fees, and you chase the areas. You look at the areas where you're strong. You're doing all of those things that you know in your head, which is in the loose business plan that you haven't written down. But there's something that happens as soon as you commit to paper, it becomes real. And you look at it and you kind of are there, kind of, that's what I have to do. And you become far more serious about it. Then you plan how you action this. Then you action. In between, your support mechanism underneath is, who's going to help you doing this? Can I ask friends? Can I ask family? Will the family help me mind the kids, or do I need a childminder? If I need a childminder, automatically it increases my cost. Then I have to go to the bank, or I have to go to a service provider, or I have to look at some way of affording those little extra bits. So you speak to your accountants and your professional network. I mean, effectively, that's a simple business, really simple business plan, because all you're doing is you're looking at what's the lifestyle you have, what do you need to support it, and how much do you want to achieve as a figure, and realistically, how are you going to get there? And when you just put figures by each of these, if that works within your framework, I mean, you could substitute any of these for other things going on in your life. But if that works within your framework, you've created a presto an A4 business plan, which isn't wordy, isn't heavy, hasn't taken you so long. And as it goes through the year, you get to month 3, you're in March, you get it out and you say, is this still the same picture? Do I need to add an extra leg? Or do I need to take one off? Or do I need to change one? Or maybe, you know, maybe I don't need the bank because I've got a policy of I'm not going to borrow any money because I don't owe any money, which is a strategic business plan decision. So there's loads of things like that, I think, which is absolutely key. We ask practitioners, what are the key reasons that you're a practitioner? A whole bunch of people said, in partnership with my husband, by preference. People like, unfortunately or fortunately, a lot of architects marry architects. And that subsequently creates a lot of children who end up going around buildings and their childhood is contained with, yeah, we went to see this. And my kids are the same. And none of them want to be architects. But you have a lot of things that you choose to do. And if you have a partner, the beauty is if you do have a partner that's an architect, you have someone immediately to bounce off. You've got ideas, you can throw an idea, it can create a third idea, you know, 1 + 1 = 3 in this case. Flip side, other things, I have 2 partners who work in an office. I work for a department by day, my primary jobs remain with a larger practice. My home office is a satellite office. A lot of practitioners, and some of them that are here, are thinking of going from major practice into their own practice. They feel like they've got to the stage. They're probably in the area of 35 plus in age. Because by about 35, you've got a number of years under your belt. You've been working, you would have worked probably about 2, 3 projects. Hopefully, as a minimum, 1 or 2 of them would have been realized. And you have an idea of what it takes to make a project work. And even then, 35 is still quite young for a practitioner. As to say you're running a business at 35 in an architectural practice is actually quite bold. I have one client who said to me, we were kids at the AA and we decided to get together and set up a practice. We had no projects, but we had energy and we had the drive to do a practice. And that carried us for about 3 years. It will carry you when you're out of college and you've got no experience, you're enthusiastic, you keep going if you can afford it. But when you're 35, you have a little bit more real view of the world and it won't carry you. So you want an immediate return. In the way that you go to your boss and you say, I need a pay rise because it's my annual review. You're the boss, so you say to yourself, I have to deliver. And if I'm not delivering, I need to question myself as to whether I'm doing the right thing. But when you question yourself, I think it's really wise not to be down on yourself because it's a tough market and everybody's out there fighting for business. So you just keep going. Other things, I'm at a retirement age, and I work as a part-time consultant. Other people have said the legal, practical and financial hurdles of employment are too great. So there's a whole batch of things. The positives. We asked a lot of people what they felt were the good parts of being a solo practitioner. At the top here, we've got 87% of people said it was the freedom to manage themselves, to design what they wanted to design. That was really important to them. A lot of solo practitioners worked in practice where they became very confident technical architects, but actually they didn't particularly get the opportunity to design. Because within a practice, there's economies when you're all running businesses now. But if you've got somebody who's particularly good at NBS specification, it's actually in your interest to get them to do the next one and the next one, rather than letting everybody have a go and thinking about their development. You do what's good for the business. So I think the idea that you can do your own thing and design, which is why you got into architecture, is actually a great privilege, and not actually shouldn't take it for granted in a way, because it's really easy to forget it when the money's not coming in. That this is the reason I'm doing this. I enjoy not having to commute. 80% of people said that. A lot of the people that answered this actually were based in London. And anybody who's based in London in the main will probably take the tune. And it is a, can be challenging. Moving on to the very final one there. I like being able to spend time with my family. One of the commitments, I think, for any kind of noble profession like architecture is, beyond money, you have to put in the time. One of the talks I went to earlier on was never compromise on your product. Your product is your calling card, and particularly when you're a sole practitioner, if you're doing a project and you feel it's not the best, it's almost like having a business card where you give it to someone and you're slightly embarrassed because it doesn't look good, because you feel it doesn't reflect me and I could be better. And it's this, again, balance of I need to get the fees in, but I need to do stuff that I really believe in and I want to believe in. So make yourself love the work you do. Push yourself. Sometimes it might not be the 9 to 5. Give it a little bit of extra time. Keep pushing your brand. Your brand is everything. You are your brand. You're a walking brand. If you're a sole practitioner, you could have your picture on your card. You are the brand. And your word is your integrity. When people come to you, it's everything. So your work cannot become negative, actually. It's difficult to meet clients because my office isn't public facing. The blurring of work and home is a problem. Almost half there. We've got about 42% of people do find it difficult to work from home. Okay, and that's a real issue. I'm going to move on very quickly now. Home offices are lonely. This is the biggest thing after time. The loneliness of it all, and often blurring the lines of something that you're doing domestically actually ending up taking an awful lot of it. But again, I've got a series here of things that practitioners have said. Things like there is nobody to bounce ideas off. So I belong to a group of small practices to discuss practice issues and ideas. It's difficult at times, especially during the school holidays, to maintain concentration focus. You need to stay at the top of breaks to avoid cabin fever. Those kind of things probably resonate with a number of. Finally, are there any pointers you'd like to share with fellow sole practitioners? We asked this to practices, and the sheets that you have are just little simple kind of pearls of wisdom that people have emailed to us that we think it would be useful. Now, you might find that you already do 99% of it, but even if you get one idea that makes you think, okay, that's kind of okay, I might try that, then you've got something useful out of this. And finally, factors influencing satisfaction levels. When you run a practice, you have 50% of your psychology, which is genetic tendencies. You will do things in a certain way because that's the way you've been brought up. That's the way you've experienced it in your practice. That's what you know. 10% will be the circumstance of where you are. And I work in home, it's noisy, I can't work there between 3 when the kids come home and 6 when they're eating. But 40% is totally up to you. You have the opportunity to create what it is you want to do to make the best of your practice. And that's an incredibly powerful amount of opportunity to change, turn, direct your practice into being what you want it to be.
A little bit of a sort of a biography, I suppose, coupled with what we've been doing as a business over the last 6 years. In talking with Del in preparation as to what to do for this afternoon, it was really a matter of giving a little bit of insight, I suppose, as to who I am, where I've come from, and whether or not that has had influence over the type of work that we do as a practice, and indeed how we've strove to achieve being bigger than the kitchen table. But there was a point where I used to aspire to the kitchen table. I was actually on the side table in the house. But, I worked with Richard Rogers for 15 years, and I left Richard in 2005 after a great deal of soul searching and no doubt visits to Del and thinking if I just go out and have a little chat with Del, I might be able to see the way forward. And it never really became clear. But I did find myself in a small design practice which went from the heady heights of doing international work with Richard to doing international work on a very bespoke level for a design company I'd never heard of even before I stepped outside of Richard Rogers. And that was for Thought Design, and that was to be their head of architecture and design. And really what that did was actually galvanise a lot of thoughts that I was having at the time as to how I might be able to get myself in a new satisfactory environment, something which I thought would give me legs for the second half of my career. I started working with Richard. Sorry, I'll take you through a few slides here, which just to sort of give you an insight as to what type of work I was involved with and the sort of personality that's standing in front of me. I started working on all of the Japanese jobs in Richard's office, which spanned probably about 2 or 3 years in the boom time, when there was absolutely nothing being built in this country. So I had the great offer, as it were, that I was a new kid on the block going into work in a practice like that, that gave me the opportunity to work with some extremely talented individuals, many of which I'd never heard of before, apart from the name of the practice. And you suddenly realise that after a good education and a lot of success in my own private life before that, thinking you're now going to really contribute to something in modern architecture, you realise that you absolutely know nothing. And that was quite a rather soul-searching moment, but it's the sort of thing that keeps your mouth shut for a few years until you feel like you've got something to contribute. So I started working on a lot of tensile work and technical work, as you would do as a young architect, putting buildings together, playing a bit of a bit part in putting packages, and learning one's trade about how to put the technology of a building together. And really this carried on in my time in Richards for a number of years, straddling from the luxury of working in Japan, where at that time there was a great deal of money around. We were doing some very interesting architecture, to looking at specific tasks, which this was actually in Korea, where we were employed by, it was actually a caravan company that saw that the way forward in their new market was to develop a product that was a 20th of the cost of the lowest building products in the market that they knew at the time, which when you look at building products in Korea is pretty low. So we had to completely reinvent with Arabs how we were going to go about modulating this whole supply chain network. So I went from, you can always sort of begin to see a trend building up as to the technological side of my background and what it means to me as an architect, I suppose. The importance of being able to put these buildings together, which ranged from overseas work in Japan to homegrown work, which is in 88 Wood Street, which was, again, using some Japanese contractors in this instance, but getting a real immersion into what it was actually like to work with different contractual environments. And another reason for mentioning this is just the importance. I think one of the points you mentioned, Del, about how terrifying running your own practice can be from a legal perspective, and thinking that you're just about to find yourself up in an adjudication process or in court. Well, the reality of that is, of course, that doesn't go away, but it's how you live with it and how you actually cope with the dexterity of how you put a job together. And unfortunately, working at Richards, I always had the opportunity of being able to work on a number of diverse contractual arrangements, which meant that you were quite familiar with understanding the different typography of what one job versus another would be in your responsibilities. This particular job went on to have quite a lot of success in its awards, and my great nemesis, I suppose, in the time that I was with Richard, was doing the Millennium Dome as the project architect, and it was, I think, the beginnings of the end for me, in a way, that I felt that there were a team of 30 architects working on this building at one point. And after that, I was beginning to think, where are we going to go with this? I can see now that if it's taken 5 or 6 years to develop this building to the point where it happened in buildings of this size, virtually overnight, really. But if you then extrapolate the time left in your career, you've probably got about another 5 or 6 buildings left in you. It sounded terrifying. So I enjoyed it immensely and thought this really was the most exhilarating experience to do a building of that size and to now see it as well with such success. I just put these in for my own sake because I like them in my portfolio, but it's some photographs that you don't often get to see because they're not published. But you can sort of see really, at the time when we first went down to the site, it was nothing more than a mud patch. And to see this building spring up from there was fantastic. But it went up in next to no time. We had 12 weeks to put all of these panels in once we'd erected the tensile structure. And it's obviously had its ups and downs during the millennium year, but we're all familiar with that. I guess just to round all of this off, I started working at Richards as a student for a night and a day on the competition entry, which was this building in Tower 5. I think it was actually on this drawing as well. I then went back after the Millennium Dome to work with Mike Davies on running the team for the scheme design phase of the airport terminal. That was the third time I actually visited that building, and that was a time span of 12 years. And at that point it really did begin to gel in my mind that things needed to move on. And was also doing a lot of master planning work as well. This was development of the area around Wembley, beginning to generate ideas along with Mark Darman at that time about how one creates a sense of spirit about places. Two little projects to show here, principally because they give a link into what I'm about to say next, which was that throughout all of the time of doing bigger and bigger buildings with Richard, that I fortunately kept getting these little tidbits which were thrown my way that kept my interest going in smaller scale work. This was it's actually for Richard's brother-in-law for a house in California, and it got to within a month of being on site, to which I had my bags packed and I was just about ready to go, and probably I wouldn't be standing here today if it was. Anyway, it didn't happen, it didn't get built, but just to say that amongst all of that big work, there were also some little things which I found like little jewels, which I enjoyed immensely. This was actually for Richard for a weekend house, an idea that we were developing right up until the point where we found it was going to cost £2 million, and then it dived quite quickly. At the time that I was doing Terminal 5 for the third time, my wife and I bought this house in Putney, and it looked nothing like this. It was a bit of a state to say the least. I think the lady who lived there for 50 years, as is the story with many architects, nothing had happened to the property. And we did this thing up, and we literally, it took 3 years because I was working on it by myself at the weekend. I basically built it myself, and it really was a bit of it was just pre-children. It was a bit of an outlet for me to find that you could work on this big international work, but at the same time have a bit of fun doing something in your own home. And the purpose of really developing this and putting these photographs here is a timely reminder of me of just thinking, why did I step out by myself? And I'd have to say that this building was done from a very personal perspective, just because it was life for my wife and I. But it also meant that it really was beginning to gel a number of ideas that I thought, actually, if you can make a business out of this and make this work, it would be a lot of fun to do. Also, the market was changing quite dramatically. The refurbishment market was something which, 10 years ago, if you were looking to try and get a £100,000 project in refurb costs, they were few and far between, or you'd think that you've got Rockefeller as a client. Now, I'd say £100,000 has to be £1 million, at least, to make this kind of thing work. But fortunately, there's an awful lot of people out there doing that kind of turnaround of money, which is quite ridiculous, really, when you think about it. But, so this building here was done whilst I was at Rogers, and actually, let's go back one more. If you remember this image here, I'll go on 2 slides. We're very fortunate that whilst I was still working with Richard, I managed to get quite a bit of press out of just doing this, this building. And that image I pointed to a moment ago was actually on the back of a number 22 bus going over Putney Bridge. And little did I know at the time, but it got a lot of coverage, principally because it was all about the beginnings of digging out basements, and this was actually done with the London Basement Company at the time. So, and then shortly after this, you can see within the space of 3 years that 3 little children turned up. So that was really the beginnings of the practice. And where I was laughing about the kitchen table, that was that's the beginnings of the office. So it wasn't even a table, it's a side table. As I'm sure you're all aware, that a lot of things don't ever come off to actually being a building. And you find a way of actually punching above your weight if needs be. If an opportunity comes along, you find a way. And this was a fantastic opportunity which was given me within the first few weeks of working by myself. And it was for an extension of a hospital in Blackrock in Dublin. And it was a principal building here which had already been extended in the 70s. And the owners, the board members, had bought a tiny little petrol station here, which had meant that their land, which is all around here, suddenly had the opportunity of developing a significant building within a number of different parcels. My job was to do a feasibility study on what this could be. And I'll take you through a few slides to sort of show how, what did I do rather than being startled like a rabbit in the headlights, that you've got to remember those things where all those years of training with Richard, that you've got to go back to doing your analysis work and looking at scale, looking at traffic management plans, photographing the hell out of it, looking at a number of different building typographies and grains. All of those things are all good foundation, solid proposals for a feasibility study. It doesn't matter whether it came from a large practice or whether it came from a one-man band working on his side table at home. The principle of your development, if it's sound, will work, whether it came from a 20-person team or a single-person team. The importance of this was to show really that we built a baseboard model. I say we, I know this, I've just got used to saying we, but I farmed this out. It was only me at this point, with a guy who left Rogers, who moved to Copenhagen, and I gave him the baseboard model to build, which he did in Copenhagen. We then had another member from Richard Rogers doing a little bit of moonlighting for me for a bit of pocket money, which was building different types of building forms, and we were fitting the model built in Copenhagen with the building notionally built in Hammersmith into these different models and switching and changing them all around again. And at the time, my overhead was on an hourly basis, which was just whatever I was paying them. So I had no other further commitment to offices or to staff which I was committed to. But it's the importance of showing really, if you get it right, you've got the right synergy of the information coming through which answers the board's questions, that you will keep going forward in this process until the point where they actually start having to think seriously about funding the project. So we actually got to the point where we had potentially a 55 million euro building, and it was still only me at this point. We had lemon wood models made, and we got right to the point of doing CGIs, which were, I mean, they look very blocky, but considering this was probably only a few months' work of a handful of people doing bit parts, trying to put something together. And that's as far as the project got, primarily because the reality for the board meant that the next step was the commitment of 55 million euros. And as it was, this was just before the downturn of 2008, when the board, which was made up of half surgeons and half developers, then began to realise that this is quite a lot of commitment for the hospital. So they've reined it in and nothing has happened on this site now. I get on very well with all the members on the board, but they're appreciative of what you've done. They still don't know that I'm still only a one-man band, but I just think it's there's smoke and mirrors when it has to be. At the same time, I think cash flow, Nick, you were mentioning about beginnings of the office, that I was hoping on this particular job, which was an opportunity came my way for the replacement of Festival Pier. It's a beautiful building which would have been a signature restaurant right at the point where you could have your embarkation point for the new Thames Clippers. And we managed to get paid for this, which was great, because it's an idea that was just a bit of a throwaway, but politics changed, and this site was then offered. It was scrapped already to get the business by the O2, the London Eye, to get the link down to the O2, so people were doing the London Eye and the O2. So there had to be a bit of a tie into the two, and this just became a little bit out of a limb. Who knows, maybe one day the politics will change and it might come back again. Again, back to smoke and mirrors. This was a job I was doing for a developer which was entering into a competition, which now actually has come back as another real project under very different guise, but it was for the redevelopment of the John Lewis depository site. And the purpose of this was to show that this was actually a 3-week exercise. It became second in the competition, and it was me and 2 other people which were helping. And they were part-time as well. And we developed this by just being accurate with the information that we need to try and present to the board. Again, this is another quick turnaround of something which came and went, sadly, but this was a large 75-story building. In the background of all of that larger work, which I was hoping would happen, being something I was familiar with at Rogers, my core business was generating refurbishment work for old Victorian buildings in Chelsea, Kensington, Knightsbridge, and that's become our stock trade. And the purpose of showing this really was to say that whatever you get as a piece of information, as a job, an opportunity, you must always give it 110%, because in the bedrock of all of the work that we've had come in and out of the office, that, as Del was saying, it's your calling card, so you can't afford to have one dull one. Richard very fortunately called me up to say that we wanted to do the River Cafe, and offered it to us. And at that time, again, it was still only me. So this really did mean, with the speed with which this project needed to happen, that I needed to employ somebody. And hence the reason why I then went to Dell. And the purpose for that was that I was still uncertain, as it is for anybody who's going from the kitchen table to an office and staff, as to whether or not you were going to succeed onto being 2 staff, 3 staff, 10 staff, 20 staff. And so I was very happy to pay for a recruitment person to work on the books, on the assumption that that could get turned on or off. As it was, that was 4 years ago now, I think, from memory. And the lady who came to work with me is still in the office and an integral part of it, and has become a very successful member of staff. These are recent jobs that we've been finishing this summer. Just the cleanliness of the commitment to detail, how you actually find something different out of a site. The sort of work that I was used to doing at Rogers, you had to question hard about what the solution to the problem was. Analysing that and bringing it forward to the solution that you're proposing for a client is something which is the skill with which how you present that and how you succeed with the design intent is often quite difficult. But this is in Chelsea, tiny little house. We finished this summer. Managed to increase it by about 1/3 of the area of the building, which is actually a subterranean structure, which is helping actually at that time working with Kensington and Chelsea with their development guidelines for subterranean developments. Trying to get something which feels like that it's not an underground structure. It's got daylighting to it. It's got some kind of approach to the synergy of spaces and how they're working with each other. We are quite good at planning. This was actually on a site of scientific interest, and it was a tiny little bungalow that was on here. We just received planning permission for this building here, which has increased the footprint by threefold, and in something which you would consider really wouldn't stand a chance of having any further development on that site because it's such a sensitive site. It's down in Croy Bay in Devon. But again, it all just comes down to the sketches and analysis. I just put those in, which is probably quite difficult to see, but it's just to show that really, as you pick this thing apart, that you will find a way forward, and it presents itself quite logically without having to hope that you're just suddenly going to see purple today and a completely different colour the next. This is one we've got on site at the moment. Again, I'm just sort of saying commitment to the detail of your client spending an awful lot of money on you as a practice, and the least you can do is give him 110% back by the quality of work that you're giving him. This refurb work of this style, and this is about £5 million worth of work, costs an awful lot of money for the client, and it's a big commitment for us as a practice. Principally because you've got to treat it like a commercial job. Because if it goes wrong, you can guarantee you'll be in court, just as you would be in a commercial job. Lastly, this slide here was just to say, these little jobs come and go in the office, and we never get paid for them. It's the half chance now that the whopping job could come back in again. Fortunately, we've got to the point where the bedrock of work is enough to sustain the practice, and it gives us the opportunity of actually having a bit of a fish where we could go and try and catch Moby Dick if we can. When these opportunities come along, you've got to jump on it. And these little things here, this is a site right next to the first building we saw, which was an old Brothers building. And the purpose of putting this up lastly was to say this client here, for this project, was also the Festival Beer client. So, you know, always look after your contacts and always make sure that you make them feel like they've got their money's worth out of it and that you've got something to be proud about. Because I think that's really been the spirit of the success of our practice, is how we've gone from here the right way through the spirit of this work to get to points where we just sort of finished that this summer. That there's a sort of a technical background in all of them, which I think comes through. I'd like to believe it comes through. And I guess that just comes to the commitment of the style of architecture you want and the quality of work over and above everything else. That was a quick canter through the life of Stuart Forbes.
Could we take, we've got about 5 minutes left, can we take any questions that anybody might have?
At what point did you go from the side table to the kitchen table or the office that you might have here? At what point did you make the example? This much recognition?
Yeah, it's funny, I hope that question was going to come up because it was something you mentioned, Del, and I suddenly thought the commitment, we've recently moved offices, where we've gone from our first office to our second office, and it now means that we are capable of growing up to about 20 staff if we wanted to.
So how big are you now?
We're 10 at the moment, and the first step was a really easy one because I fortunately owned a ground floor apartment which had a lovely garden to it, and it was I was right on the verge of selling it and thinking we don't need it anymore because I have the other house, and the guy had literally come across from France to come and sign on the dotted line at the same time as Richard called me up from New York saying I want to do the RIBA Cafe. And it happened within a matter of days. And I paid them all off and thought it's a nasty thing to have to do, but at least they all went away not being out of pocket. And that became the base of the office. So we had a tiny little one-bedroom apartment, which I used until the freeholder flung me out, which is probably a good thing because we were just on the verge of expanding into the premises that we're in at the moment anyway. So it all had a natural progression, but it was really assisted by the fortune of having not a huge commitment on the overhead of having to take on a big commercial office.
Did it help that you didn't fall out with Richard Rogers on the way out of his practice and that he could obviously bring some work your way? Because the problem with leaving practice sometimes is that you don't leave on good terms, and therefore...
you're probably right in both cases. Leaving Richard's office is difficult to do. It's a fantastic place to work. It's got a queue a mile long to get into it, and when you're there, most people don't leave. And it usually fluctuates by the way that the market either has to have staff or it doesn't. But the core team of people that have been there, of which I probably still see myself there if I haven't had this crazy idea to start by myself, but it's a sort of lifestyle you get absorbed into, and Richard is a huge talisman for the profession, and also for his practice, because you feel like one of the family when you're there. So you really don't like to feel like you're messing that relationship up. And I still work with Richard on his house on one project or another, and it's a relationship which you never would dream of messing up in the first place. I think that'd be tantamount to professional
He understood, I take it.
So
But he understood what you wanted to do, and therefore...
yeah, Richard, being Richard, was, and in some respects, it's one of those heart in your mouth moments that I didn't tell anybody else until I went to Richard and asked for his opinion and his blessing in a way to say that I wanted to leave. And this was the purpose. And he then said to me, you've got to give it a go. And that point I was thinking, okay, we have done it now. But he was absolutely right. You have got to give it a go. And you never know the answer to the question until you do give it a go.
Quick question. When you first started out on your own, you obviously worked on your own house, and how did that then progress to the other jobs that you've done of that scale, and how did you get those next clients? And, doing a silent question, you do other work in terms of your competition work and analysis work, do you do those on spec?
Yeah, most of the competition work is done on spec. The bigger commercial work's all speculative now. There's a time when obviously you're chasing every penny you can get, and when we first started the practice, talking of Dale's focus on what keeps you going to make sure that you're not losing time in the day, the biggest focus for me was making sure that I had the mortgage paid at the end of the month, and I couldn't see any further than 6 weeks of income ahead of me for about the first 18 months. And at that time we just had twins in the family and another one was on its way. So the objective was to match my salary for the first year that I left, thinking if at least I can do that and I haven't taken a step back and I'm not committing the family to financial rack and ruin. And at the same time as those commitments grow financially, that it does sharpen your awareness of knowing exactly how to run your business, because otherwise if it's not done properly, you can see the slippery slope. There's too many mouths that start taking it off you rather than putting it back in.
I think we have to wrap it up there, because I think the time is over, but I'd like to thank you for your time, and hopefully that was okay.